There's a vast amount in this world that remains a mystery to us, and perhaps always will. Among these enigmas are the oceans, which cover more than 3/4 of the planet. While we've gathered some understanding of their existence and composition, the truth is, we barely know what lies within them. In fact, if you were to check, you'd discover that only about 5% of the ocean has been mapped. That's an incredibly small fraction, leaving much unexplored, including the terrifying creatures lurking in the depths. Thankfully, most of them aren't amphibious. Just saying. With that in mind, let's dive into 20 terrifying sea monsters that actually exist. Stingrays. While some of you may not think of stingrays as being monsters, they are creatures that you don't want to mess with, unless you want a barb to be inside of your body. We'll begin with one way that stingrays are monster-like. They have bodies that not many other creatures in the ocean have. They feature flat bodies that move in very unique ways, and they almost fly through the water in order to get around, which has been the inspiration for many things, including Pokemon and others. But the biggest stingray ever caught was a freshwater stingray that was about 4 meters long and weighed over 300 kilograms. That's a really big stingray. The reason that most people would say this species is monstrous is because of their tails. Their tails are often sharp, barbed, or serrated, depending on the species, and they're really good at sticking it to their prey where they want to. That's honestly one of the biggest dangers. It's not like a sword or a knife that cuts into you. It's a literal jab that pierces inside and causes some extreme problems depending on where it may hit. The fact that some of these stingray species have venom in their tails doesn't help matters either. Not to mention, they sometimes love to reside in freshwater areas and hide in the ocean's mud, where people can accidentally step on them and become stabbed. It was a stingray that took the life of legendary wildman and conservationist Steve Irwin, as their tail spike went right into the gaps in his ribcage and punctured his heart. So never let anyone tell you that these creatures cannot be deadly. Japanese spider crab. I will fully admit that the next entry isn't monstrous in the sense that it could kill you. I'm not even sure how the Japanese spider crab would be able to kill someone in the first place, but the reason it's on this list is because of how it's the biggest crab species in the world in terms of its length, and there's no real reason why that happens. That might sound mean at first, but when you compare the length of the Japanese spider crab to others, it really feels as though this one is the odd one out. The other mega crabs that are out there in the world include the coconut crab, and that's one of the largest because of bulk, not length. Which leaves you to ask, well, how big is this crab lengthwise? The record set by them is 3.7 meters from leg end to leg end. That's important to note because if you look at its core body, it's not really all that big by comparison. Yet the legs have a really long reach. It may be weird, and it freaked Japanese fishermen out when they first saw it. In fact, when they did first see it, they nicknamed the thing Crabzilla, and it's not hard to see why they made that distinction. But despite its size, it's hardly the most aggressive creature in the ocean. In fact, it prefers to blend into the depths so that predators don't find it. It has a hard exoskeleton to deter predators from sinking their teeth in. Yet, you can't help but look at the thing and say that it's a monster, because there's literally no other crab that's like it. It's not unlike what happened when the first Komodo dragon was discovered. That's a lizard, but it far outscopes any lizard you may know. The blobfish. One may argue that the blobfish is not monstrous on its own, but instead is the byproduct of what we, as humans, have done to it. You see, many creatures on this list live in the deepest parts of the ocean. That's not really a secret. The catch is that humanity has wondered so much about how these creatures survive down there that they've tried to capture some of them and bring them to the surface. The blobfish, as it's officially known, was one such victim of that practice. When it was brought to the surface, it was not able to handle the lack of pressure from the ocean, and so it became a rather ugly blob, hence the name. It's really sad that we basically turned it into this monster ourselves. East Pacific red octopus. Here's another creature that's not really something you should directly fear, but it's still no less monstrous when you realize how capable and frightening of a hunter it can be. The East Pacific red octopus is not the biggest fish in the sea, especially when you compare it to the rest of its kind. In fact, it's not even a meter long at maximum length, and its body is said to be multiple times smaller than its surrounding tentacles. So what is it that makes it so monstrous that it deserves to be on this list? Well, that would be what it does when it finds its prey. First off, the East Pacific red octopus is a generalist predator, meaning that it goes after all kinds of prey versus just one singular kind. That's important to note because it also means that if it likes something, it's going to eat it, and that's a scary thought. But what's even scarier is what happens when it catches certain kinds of prey. First, it's going to begin changing colors to signal its victory, proving that animals definitely have an ego. Then it's going to drill a hole through the shell of its prey to deliver venom and more, easily opening it up. That's right, the octopus has the ability to drill into shells and inject its prey with venom so that it can't resist further destruction. That's scary in all the ways that matter, because animals should never be able to drill into other animals, and yet this octopus does that on the regular. So maybe we should all be grateful that we don't have a shell. Some people on the internet claim that NASA stopped exploring the ocean after encountering something extraordinary. But what exactly was NASA doing there in the first place? Here's some context. While NASA is primarily focused on space exploration, they meticulously plan their launches to ensure that when components of shuttles, rockets, or satellites detach and fall back to Earth, they land in the ocean, far from populated areas. As a result, many significant pieces of NASA's history now rest on the ocean floor, waiting to be discovered. For example, the engines from the Apollo 11 mission remained lost for decades until Jeff Bezos, of all people, decided to find them. Talk about luck and money. According to this image, NASA was conducting deep-sea dives to recover lost parts when they supposedly stumbled upon a creature like this, or something equally terrifying. Of course, the image isn't a genuine photograph for obvious reasons, but could NASA, or anyone else, have encountered something massive in the ocean's depths? Surprisingly, it's not as far-fetched as it seems. Consider this. The ocean is home to creatures of staggering size. The blue whale, for instance, can reach up to 100 feet in length. Other large species of whales and sharks measure between 20 and 80 feet, depending on the species. And since we've explored only about 5% of the ocean, there are vast uncharted regions where enormous creatures could easily be hiding. If you came across one, you might be quick to label it a monster. So, what do you think? Could there really be undiscovered giants lurking in the deep? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Sea pigs. Now, there's one entity known as the sea pig that can be quite monstrous in its own right. For example, they can exist at basically 5,000 meters below sea level. That is way down there, and yet they live there just fine. Secondly, they're known to feed on the dead whales of the ocean, something you're going to learn more about coming up in this video. Finally, they're known to embody the strength in numbers motif by moving in groups of hundreds as they traverse the ocean floor. So, they're never alone, and that makes them quite a sight when you see their swarm. Sea cucumber. Now we know that on the surface, the sea cucumber doesn't seem like the most monstrous thing on this list, but trust me when I say it has a reason for being here. That reason is that not only does it secrete a kind of toxin that can be harmful to you should you touch it, but it also has a very disgusting trait that has made it infamous. Specifically, if it thinks that a predator is coming, it will literally hurl its organs at them in an attempt to get out alive. There are some toxins in those organs, but frankly, it's just disgusting that they would do this. They should probably have some class. The goblin shark. Look, you may think there are going to be a lot of sharks on this list because of their natural and monstrous nature, but you'd be wrong. We're casting a wide net here, but I needed to include the goblin shark for a few reasons. The first reason is that this creature is scary from an age standpoint, that age being about 125 million years old. No, they're not individually that old, but they're the last living members of a family that can trace back to that age, making them living fossils. The reason that's scary is that it raises the question of what else from that period of time may be swimming around in the oceans today. The other reason it's on this list is because of its looks and abilities. First off, it doesn't look like any other shark you've seen before, and it's pretty scary looking. But when you hear about what its mouth can do, you may well freak out. Because, not unlike a certain horror movie creature, the goblin shark can protrude its mouth outside of its head to bite down on its prey. That's right, it can go full-on xenomorph to get its prey. And that is wrong on so many levels. Thankfully, because of the depths of the ocean it tends to inhabit, you'll likely never see it. But if you do, just go in the other direction. It's probably better that way. Zombie worms. Before you go freaking out, you should know that I'm not talking about actual zombie worms or ones that could cause you to become a zombie if they got into you. I mean, we're not at the Last of Us stage of the world yet. Instead, I'm talking about a rather freaky type of worm that scientists have found, known to eat the bones of the dead, specifically the bones of aquatic dead like whales. There are many elements to this story that are both fascinating and scary. First off, the worms can easily exist at 3,000 meters below sea level, which is pretty deep. Secondly, they can be either the size of an eyelash or as long as your finger. And while that's not all that scary on its own, it should also be noted that the worms typically come in legions. Scientists have noted that in every whale carcass they found, the worms were there. It's honestly a bit of a mystery how the worms end up on the bones, but we might figure that out at a later time. It's also scary to learn that males of the species are known as kamikazes because they literally seek out females to mate with, and then, when they run out of energy, they die. If only actual zombies died after running out of energy. The stonefish. I don't need to wax poetic about the stonefish for the very simple reason that this fish is a straight-up killer if you let it be. It's legitimately one of the most venomous creatures in the world and can absolutely kill a person if the anti-venom that was developed isn't administered quickly. The worst part about the monstrous stonefish is that it's one of many breeds of aquatic creatures that prefer the act of camouflage versus being an active predator. They'll allow their prey to come to them and then use their venomous spines to do the rest of the work. But that's where it puts humans in such danger. It's going to blend into the environment, and then they'll accidentally step on it, getting injected with its venom. You'll be in pain until you get that anti-venom, plain and simple. The Atoya. I'm about to hit you with back-to-back worm entries, so you'd better be ready for that. Once again, I'm heading to the realm of prehistoric times to discuss the Atoya, a worm that was about 15 centimeters in length at maximum and was actually a predator. So, yeah, this was an aggressive worm. Wasn't there a movie about this kind of thing that starred Kevin Bacon? Regardless, what they did was make burrows in the shape of a U, wait for prey to come just above the burrow, and then lash out to get them. That's pretty scary when you think about it. Again, they weren't the biggest of worms, but to think that they were once willing to get aggressive in order to get food. Well, we should all be glad that they've evolved ever since then. Nematini. When you have to deal with an entire species of scary animals, you know you're in trouble. Ironically, the Nematini, also known as ribbon worms, aren't the ones that would immediately strike fear into you when you see them. That's because you're not going to see them all that easily. After all, they are really, really small. Some of them can be only a few millimeters in length, and they can live in the deepest parts of the ocean, so they're not exactly a threat to humans. However, because of their carnivorous nature, they can also use their small bodies to get into almost anywhere, which includes the bodies of their victims. One time, one of these worms got into a host and then slowly began to eat the eggs the host laid. That equaled about 50% of those eggs just on its own. Because of their makeup, these worms are also known to break off into pieces and then completely regrow their bodies, as in each fragment grows back into a full-on body. That makes these worms really hard to kill, which is pretty scary. The frilled shark. Are you ready for the last shark entry in this video? It's not the great white or even the hammerhead, it's the frilled shark. What makes this one more worthy than the others? Well, it's not about worthiness so much. They're not Thor. Instead, we're talking about some truly monstrous tendencies this shark has. For example, like the goblin shark, the frilled shark is a living fossil. You can tell that rather easily by the way its body looks and how it moves. It doesn't have many of the typical fins that sharks have. Instead, its body is known to be more like an eel than anything else. This carries over into how it moves. Instead of swimming like a shark, it wiggles and moves its body like an eel so that it can get closer to its prey, lunge at them, and swallow them whole. In fact, they're so confident in their abilities that they'll even go after fish larger than themselves and try to swallow them whole as well. Here again, we have a case of history delivering something to the present that isn't exactly normal by our standards, and it's truly freaky as a result. The Pacific Black Dragon. Almost anything with the word dragon in its name has to at least be some kind of monstrous, right? After all, dragons were created to be some of the most powerful beasts in all of fantasy. Fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, the Pacific Black Dragon fits into that model. This is a deep-sea fish that is not only frightening to look at, but also quite the fierce predator, just like a dragon. As ambush predators, their bodies are dark black, and even their stomachs are coated with black tissue to block out any light produced by the bioluminescent animals they eat. So, they hunt in the dark and go to great lengths to ensure they stay there. This dragon knows what it's doing, but thankfully they're only about 60 centimeters at maximum length, so they don't pose much of a threat to humans. However, I wouldn't recommend testing that theory. The anglerfish. There is so much scary stuff to talk about with the anglerfish that we could easily dedicate much of this list to it, but for now, I'll focus on the main things. For example, the anglerfish is a deep-sea fish that lives in the midnight zone, part of the ocean where natural sunlight doesn't reach. As such, the anglerfish developed a unique adaptation, a protrusion that comes out of its head and lights up the ocean around it. Why is that scary? Well, the light isn't for itself. Instead, it uses the light to attract nearby fish. The fish are drawn to the light since they aren't used to it. Slowly, the anglerfish moves in and chomps down. That's how it feeds regularly. If you're curious, yes, that's the fish we saw in Finding Nemo in that one scene. Happy feeling gone. Oh, and if you want to know something even freakier, the big anglerfish you see are females. The males are minuscule and literally have to fuse themselves to the female to mate. There's just so much wrong with this fish. Flower urchins. When it comes to the more hidden monsters of the underwater world, you can't help but look at the flower urchin. At first glance, it seems like a harmless shriveled flower or mushroom, but if you provoke it, you're in trouble. Much like sea urchins, which also could have made this list, flower urchins have spines they use to prick, prod, and break off in your body. If you get hit with one, you'll be in pain. That pain multiplies if you're unfortunate enough to step on one. On top of that, you could be bitten by it, injecting venom into your body. While this venom is unlikely to kill you, it will cause extreme pain. One man described feeling the toxin moving through his bloodstream as it slowly paralyzed parts of his body. His face was paralyzed for 6 hours. Had the venom hit a critical spot, it could have stopped his ability to breathe. Yeah, be careful out there when these urchins are around. They might make sure you live longer, but not without regrets. Chimera. The fish known as the chimera is technically a kind of living fossil given its ancestry. They're closely related to sharks, which is why they technically look and move like one. But to be clear, they are not sharks. When you look at them though, you may quickly realize that this fish doesn't exactly look like anything else that's out there. It almost looks a little bit supernatural, which is why many have dubbed it the ghost shark. Curiously, these fish prefer to live in the depths of the ocean, which is why many of you may not have heard of them. Found in the deep, dark parts of the ocean, these elusive fish have a specialized retractable jaw and can produce bioluminescent displays. Despite their ghostly appearance, they are not true sharks. They primarily feed on small invertebrates and are considered fascinating and mysterious creatures in the underwater world, showcasing the diversity of life that thrives in the deep sea. It all just leaves you to wonder what else might be out there waiting to be discovered. The barrely fish. Sometimes a monstrous fish isn't monstrous because of how it acts, but instead because of how it looks. That's exactly the case with the barrelé fish, which is freaky simply because it has a transparent head. Yes, the top part of this fish's head is transparent, and that's incredibly unsettling. But why does it look that way? Well, the answer is tied to its survival in the midnight zone, a place where light is not prevalent. Its transparent head works perfectly with its upward-facing eyes, which it uses to literally look up and see silhouettes of predators or prey above it. Yes, it's a freaky-looking fish, but its unique adaptations help it stay alive, and that's something to respect, albeit from a distance. The ocean sunfish. How about another fish that's a monster simply because of how it looks? The ocean sunfish is one of the largest bony fish in the world. Not only can it grow up to 3.3 meters in length, but it can also weigh around 1,000 kilograms. Imagine swimming through the ocean and seeing this massive thing floating beside you. You'd be doing a double take for sure. Its odd, flattened body stands out even more despite its massive size, making it an unmistakable presence in the water. Also known as the mola mola, this fish holds the title of the world's heaviest bony fish. It resembles a large floating disc with fins and can weigh up to 5,000 pounds. Despite its size, it's a gentle giant that feeds primarily on jellyfish. It has a unique habit of basking near the ocean surface to warm itself in the sun, making it both a fascinating and peaceful giant of the seas. The tasseled wobbegong shark. Finally, we have one last shark to talk about. But for the record, this is yet another atypical shark that you might not expect. The tasseled wobbegong will definitely have you questioning what other kinds of sharks might be out there in the depths. This shark belongs to a proud line of carpet sharks. What are those? They're sharks that lie along the ocean floor, blending in with their environment to ambush unsuspecting prey. As you can see, the tasseled wobbegong is very good at blending in, making it extremely effective at catching smaller fish that get too close. So, not only is it a shark, but it's also a very smart shark, and what's more terrifying than that? And that's all from the depths of the ocean, where certain monsters dwell. Be grateful you don't have to deal with them every day. Which one of these sea monsters frightened you the most? Which one would you be up for seeing in person? Or perhaps you think there's another sea creature that could have easily made this list. Let me know in the comments section down below. Check out the other cool things taking place on the screen, and I'll see you next time.